We're close to 5 minutes in. So hi everybody, my name is Juliana Smith. I am the South Coast Project Manager for the Beaufort office of the Coastal Conservation League. And thank you all for joining us today for part 2 of Understanding the Impacts, a webinar about the proposed resort for Bay Point Island. At the top, before we get started, I would like to let everyone know an important update about the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting, which will ultimately make a decision about whether or not the resort can move forward with an ecotourism special use permit. That zoning board meeting has been officially scheduled for 2 weeks from today. That is September 24th at 5 p.m. So 2 Thursdays from today. It is being held in person at the Burton Wells County Park Gymnasium. Masks will be required if you intend to attend in person, and this will have a public hearing component. So this will be an opportunity to provide comment directly to the zoning board about this proposed project on Bay Point Island. We'll be sending out updates and posting information to our website, so please keep a lookout for that information because it will be forthcoming. But we thought we would take an opportunity in anticipation of that meeting to learn more about the proposed resort on the island and its anticipated impacts to wildlife, and also explore some of the great examples of ecotourism that we have here in Beaufort County locally and across the coastal plain of South Carolina. Everybody will have the opportunity to ask questions as they have them, so please feel free, everyone who's attending, to use the chat box function or to use the question and answer function to enter your questions as we go along. We will address as many of those questions as we can at the end of the webinar. And so I would encourage you, if you have a question, just to include who you'd like to answer the question so that it doesn't get too shuffled by the time we get to the end. We have 3 really great panelists with us today. They are Captain Henry Brandt, CEO of Coastal Expeditions South in Beaufort, and also the captain for the St. Philip's Island tours out to St. Philip's Island. We have marine biologist Amber Kuhn, director of the nonprofit Sea Turtle Patrol for Hilton Head Island, and we have Mr. Christian Hunt, the Southeast Program representative for Defenders of Wildlife. And we'll kick off this webinar starting with Captain Henry.
Can you hear me? All right, excellent. Good. So little introduction, like she said. My name's Captain Henry Brandt. I've been with Coastal Expeditions since 2005. And at a pretty early age, I knew this is all I ever wanted to do with my life was take people out into the wilds and spend lots of time on boats. And at Coastal Expeditions, you know, we've always had a mission statement, which is that we're a group of naturalists dedicated to the preservation of barrier islands and coastal conservation. And since the company's inception in 1992, we've always strived to inspire conservation. And we like to say inspire because oftentimes we're not directly talking about conservation on tour. Most of what is said is about the local ecosystems and the flora and fauna that live in those ecosystems. And when we're with a group of clients traveling through an undeveloped area like the Cape Remain Wildlife Refuge, Ace Basin, the Santee Delta, St. Philip's Island, we always make a point to bring up the fact that it's protected and also explain why conservation is important. But a majority of what is said is about the things that live and grow in these beautiful ecosystems we have in South Carolina. And the way we foster conservation is through appreciation. We often get a mix of clients from different parts of South Carolina and all over the country. And the clients we take on tour oftentimes aren't familiar with the area, and they rely on us to interpret that for them. And it falls on our shoulders, not just to do that, but to make them fall in love with it. And so we use boats, kayaks, and paddleboards as vehicles to inspire conservation through submersion. And when you put someone in close contact with the environment, it deepens their connection to the natural world. And there's something intangible that happens when you make someone, you know, fall in love in that way. And it's something that's oftentimes undescribable. And the goal is to make people feel that something that can't quite describe. And when you draw out those feelings by exposing and educating people, you feel like you're really making a difference when you can do that. And at a young age, it happened to me. That love of the Low Country, the love for its beauty and its culture. And when you love something, you tend to want to protect it. And then that's the goal of coastal expeditions, is to foster that kind of love for this area. And South Carolina harbors Cape Remain Wildlife Refuge, the heart of the longest stretch of undeveloped coastline on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. It holds the Ace Basin, which is the world model of green spaces, and one of the largest undeveloped estuaries that we have here on the eastern seaboard. And we need to try and maintain these green spaces and also protect new ones. And it seems to me that South Carolinians have a passion for conservation and a pride in our beautiful coastline, and that's evident when you look at the cumulative efforts that we've put together in conserving this coastline. And the developing Bay Point at this frequency, that they're trying to, seems to contradict some of that goal of coastal conservation and goes against a lot of the mission statement that a company like Coastal Expeditions has. And so Coastal Expeditions, we provide high integrity naturalist-led tours to St. Philip's Island just north of Bay Point. And we're happy to be servicing this part of the South Carolina coastline with our low impact brand of ecotourism, what we would consider to be true ecotourism. And if you look at that packet, that zoning packet, they give a quote by the TIES, right? And that says, responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education. And I think that definition of ecotourism, I think it holds a lot of truth to it. But I think it does contradict a lot of what they're trying to do on Bay Point, at least to the degree that they're trying to do it. So if you look at it, it looks like they're trying to build 60 plus structures on the island to achieve ecotourism. Where if I was to give a comparison to that, like we started doing tours of St. Philip's and had to build no additional structures on the island in order to achieve our brand of ecotourism. So, and if you look at other great examples of people who are running ecotouring, operations on little islands where guests can stay, like a great example of this would be like Little St. Simon Island down in Georgia. Has 11,000 acres, is under a T&C easement, has minimal structures, and only allows up to 32 people. If you look at St. Philip's, it has a T&C easement on it. There's only 4 structures on the island, and they're not planning to put more than like 15 people inside that house that Turner built. It's similar. There's similar great examples of what a low impact kind of eco lodging can look like on one of these undeveloped barrier islands. And I think the thing that kind of like affects me the most when I look at the proposal for the development on Bay Point is that it looks like they found most of the upland, and it looks like they're trying to develop all of the upland forest on the island, which it can't not affect the diversity on the island. So I think if we were to get them to minimize it to some degree, I think it would definitely have less impact on it. And then after that development happens, if they do it to the degree they're talking about, those visitors would have to visit a place like St. Philip's to see what an undeveloped barrier island looks like, where Bay Point in its current state shares a lot of similarities with St. Philip's Island. And the potential impacts of the development on Bay Point, I think, are hard to forecast, but I could imagine all the things you expect, which is light pollution, noise pollution, displacement of wildlife would be potential issues I could see. And true ecotourism practices more of a leave no trace set of ethics. We always strive to have as little impact as possible while serving our mission statement of inspiring conservation through adoration. And again, scaling down that development would satiate some of those concerns. So, we at Coastal Expeditions, we've always been stewards to the environment in every area we operate. And we're always working with like-minded groups to achieve that goal of coastal conservation and preservation of the barrier islands. And we're happy to be servicing this area, Beaufort, Hunting Island, St. Philip's, Bay Point area. And the development plans at Bay Point just, they have some potential to negatively affect areas like St. Philip's if it's not done correctly. And conservation and ecotourism isn't just something you do as an afterthought. It's a dharma, it's a heart path, it's a passion. And when it's not your goal, when it's not your dharma, it shows, and you can tell. So if like the main concern was conservation, you would be able to tell that that's what the goal of the thing was. So these are my thoughts on the development of Bay Point, what true ecotourism looks like.
Thank you, Captain Henry. We appreciate that. And we'll move on to our next panelist, Amber.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Kuhn. I am the director of the Sea Turtle Patrol on Hilton Head Island. Thank you, Henry, for that. That was awesome. I am also an ecology tour boat captain for a living, because monitoring sea turtles in South Carolina, that is a volunteer program with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. So I get what you're saying, and I really appreciate that. So I have a couple of slides to share, so bear with me while I share screen, which is, I wish I was in person with you guys. It's always better in person. And we'll start from the beginning, if that's okay with you guys. Okay. All right, we're good. All right, Hilton Head Island is the second largest barrier island on the eastern seaboard. The first one is Long Island, in case you're interested. We have 14 miles of ocean-facing beach. From the beginning, with Charles Fraser developing in the late 70s, Sea Pines was the first one. Their goal was to have the island be aesthetic for nature, just trying to preserve the nature and the look of the island. So it sounds kind of similar. I grew up here, so I know that it's developed and changed quite a bit, but at all costs, they do try to do some things. And the chamber, our economy is basically tourism as well. So the chamber tries to highlight that. And in their website, I'll just read you the first sentence. The attention given to preserving the environment here on Hilton Head Island has become the blueprint for other sustainability efforts around the country. That's quite a claim. It's a tall claim. I agree. But, things like street lights that aren't that obvious, signage not above the shrub line, no neon signs, no billboards. If you plan to cut down a tree, it is a huge event. So Hilton Head does its best to control some of that, but with an island that accepts thousands of tourists, it's almost impossible to completely do that. So sea turtles, my master's degree is marine biology with a focus on sea turtles. It's the most non-lucrative subject on the planet. Just want to get that out there. I know I've studied it a lot. It's my passion along with the ecotourism thing. So I'm going to just tell you some of the things that I've learned at the International Sea Turtle Symposiums over the last 22 years. There are so many factors that affect whether a sea turtle is going to nest in a certain area. The slope of the beach, the offshore shoals affect it, temperature, sand texture, maybe an experience from a past nesting episode, so many unknowns. But we are sure that sounds and lights are something that they do not prefer. And in case you're wondering, this turtle did not nest. Turned right back around as soon as it saw the person. And normally they nest at night, but if it's a cool day, sometimes they'll come out during the day. So this is Hilton Head. In case you aren't familiar, it looks like a shoe. The southern part of it looks like the toe of the shoe, and the northern part of it looks like the heel. This is a map that has nesting density numbers between 99 and 2017, so an 18-year period. We've got the ends of the island having the most density, so 447 down in Sea Pines in the south, and then that number 569 on the north, and that's Port Royal Plantation. And those two plantations are primarily residential, although Sea Pines is getting more and more rentals, just kind of taking over the island, but mostly residential. You can see a difference, particularly where the number is 112. People who live here know the rules about lights out after 10 p.m. It's an ordinance, beachfront lighting ordinance, May through October, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Lights need to be off. And they typically don't stay on the beach all night long because they live there and it's the beach. But 112, that area right there is Coligny Beach. It's a public access that's open 24 hours. You can see where there's development there more densely than other places. That's where the majority of the bars and restaurants and things like that are near the beach. And after they close, the people spill out onto the beach. So you've got all night long flashlights and rowdy people. When the turtles are out there swimming around, they pop their head up, they look at the beach at Coligny and they say, pass, we're not gonna go there. And they nest on either side of it. You can see the number jumps up significantly. So we do know that that's the reason that they don't like it there. It's pretty obvious. Okay, so when we monitor the beach for nesting, we're looking for tracks of female turtles that have come up to nest. With that permit from the Department of Natural Resources, we can move them to safe locations, which is what we did with this one, into the dune, away from the water. We put the triangle around with the tape, and then we have that orange sign that states it's federally protected, which if you think about it, means that you shouldn't bother it, but that's not always the case. I want you to notice that there are tracks. So the nest has hatched, but they're going back into the dune, and that's not the way that we want them to go. But on particularly a new moon, when there's no light, any light from porches, interior lights, those hatchlings are going to take that cue because there's not another one to direct them toward the ocean. And with hotels and the, development, they all have this little loophole because of liability and litigation. They have to be careful around pools, parking lots, stairwells. If someone trips and falls, then they can be sued. So there's always going to be light regardless in some areas of the beach. And Hilton Head, we monitor it daily. We do that May through October. And the applicant wants to use seaturtle.org as a reference, which is a public website that has all of our numbers for South Carolina beaches posted there. In 2019, last year, was a record year. It was the most sea turtle nesting that the state has seen since we've been keeping track. And Hilton Head's 14 miles of beach got 463 nests, and that's a lot for us. And if you use the beach as a whole, you can say 33 nests per mile. And a beach north of us, Kiowa, very similar in miles. They have 10 miles of beach, and they always beat me just a little. It's not a competition, but they always have just a little bit more nesting than we do. And this is my theory on that. For 57 nests per mile, that's a lot more than we have. But compared to our 5 major hotels and 15-ish vacation clubs and condominiums that are densely populated, they have 1 major resort, and mostly residential also incorporate a preserve on their beachfront. So they have a completely different density when it comes to tourism than we do. And I think that's the biggest difference for such a similar beach, and the turtles seem to like that. But even more different is Cape Island. Cape Island is about 4 miles. It's north of that. It is a part of the Cape Remain Wildlife Refuge, and they had over 2,000 nests on 4 miles of beach. There's no way I can compete with that. And there's no way I ever will, because that beach does not have any development on it whatsoever. And that's the most obvious difference. Like I said, there's other factors like beach slope. They have a steeper slope, shoals, all sorts of different things. But to me, the most obvious is one's developed and one's not. So it's pretty clear that the sea turtles like to have it dark and quiet. So when we're speaking of Bay Point, we're looking at Bay Point, and literally I can look at Bay Point from the north end of Hilton Head. It's across Port Royal Sound from us. It's about 3 miles of nesting beach. In 2019, they had 107 nests recorded, and the Department of Natural Resources monitors that, but they only monitor it once a week. So the potential over there, if I monitored Hilton Head once a week, I think we could definitely cut my numbers in half, maybe more, because wind and rain and people traffic and all of these things obliterate those tracks and the evidence of that nest. So if we don't mark them daily, we might miss them. So without daily monitoring, they still have just as many nests as Hilton Head. So if you put just a conservative number on that, they could have 150 nests per mile. So it is a significant nesting beach in our area. Okay, here's another nest. Obviously, it has hatched, which is great. But if you look at it more closely, you can see that there are handprints, there's chacos, there's flip-flops, bare feet, all different sizes, all different shapes. And obviously this nest had a lot of attention when it was hatching in the middle of the night. And people, even on an eco-friendly island, with signage at every beach access, printed materials in all the hotels, turtle tops. I mean, we go the full gambit trying to get these people aware. Every week it's a new batch of people, what not to do. And in this case, I'm sure it wasn't malicious, but curiosity got the best of them. And not being sea turtle biologists, they don't know that interfering with that journey from the nest to the water disturbs the imprinting process. And that is the process that helps them navigate the entire planet for the rest of their lives. So just by, not letting them do it themselves, you can interfere with their ability to survive for the rest of their life. And if you pick up an egg at a certain stage of development and rotate it, the embryo detaches from the inside of the shell and it will not hatch. So just by picking something up and replacing it is detrimental. So in the picture to the right, that's a hole, a big hole. And holes were so big on Hilton Head in the last few years. It's recreation, it's what people do at the beach. They build sand castles and you need to dig a hole for that. We actually made an ordinance that states that the holes must be filled at the end of the day. The shovels can't be bigger than 30 inches. They can't be metal. All of these restrictions just to keep the holes down. In this situation, a nesting female comes up, marginally misses that whole nest. Thank goodness didn't fall in on the way back. Could be injured, definitely wouldn't nest if it had, but missed it. If it stays there and the hatchlings come out of the nest, they would definitely fall in and never make it to the ocean. So just a hole is something that people will definitely do at the beach. And, we want to make sure that that's filled in. So nothing is mentioned in the proposal about incorporating this monitoring, which would probably be required by the state. At an erosional beach, they're probably going to have to look into renourishment at some point. Hilton Head just did one in 2016 that cost $20 million. So it's not cheap to keep that going. And the biological opinion from National Marine Fisheries required that lighting ordinance in 1990 when it was done the first time. So there are ordinances that need to be in place, monitoring, which is going to be a huge effort on that island based on what we think is going on there for sea turtle nesting. With paid patronage, you have to have the lights on. And people are going to be on the beach all night long because they're on vacation and that's what they do. So judging by what we've experienced on Hilton Head Island on a much larger scale, yes, but from the beginning of the development, we have focused on the environment and preserving that. We fight it every single day. So I would recommend these measures and know that an endangered species is definitely something that needs attention. Nesting on the beach, along with the birds resting. And with that segue, I'm going to pass it on to Christian Hunt. He's with the Defenders of Wildlife, the Southeast region member of that. So I am going to hand it off. Thank you guys for attending this. Really great that you are doing that. And I will give it off to Christian. Thank you.
Thanks, Amber. Let me go share my screen here. Bear with me a sec, guys. All right. Hey y'all, my name is Christian Hunt. I work for Defenders of Wildlife, which is a national conservation group. I'm based in the Southeast region. Our focus is mainly upon imperiled species and the protections of the habitats that they depend upon, such as in this case, Bay Point Island. To that end, really one of our most important mechanisms for seeing to the protection of rare and declining species is the Endangered Species Act. I'm going to talk a little about the legalese today and the implications as it relates to this project, but I'm sure you guys are at least vaguely aware that the ESA is really one of our most important and foundational tools for protecting wildlife in this country. And it's safeguarded a lot of the iconic American species that you often think of, like the grizzly bear, red wolves, bald eagles, Florida manatees, you name it. And it's been extremely effective. Since 1973, it's prevented the extinction of 99% of listed species. And were it not for the ESA, roughly 230 species would probably be extinct by now. There are several listed species that utilize Bay Point Island, which is why we're talking about this important statute today. But before getting into those species themselves, I do just want to give a little more clarity as to how the ESA operates. And as it relates to this project, there's one component of the ESA that is extremely relevant, and that's Section 9. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, Section 9A1 prohibits the taking of any endangered species of fish or wildlife. Take is a legal term of art, obviously, and it's kind of broadly defined, but it partly encompasses harassment, which is defined as an intentional or negligent act or omission which creates the likelihood of injury to wildlife by annoying it to such an extent as to significantly disrupt normal behavioral patterns, which include but are not limited to breeding, feeding, or sheltering. Take also partly encompasses harm, which, as the word implies, is an act which actually kills or injures wildlife. So in short, the ESA take prohibition does not allow actors to harm or harass listed species without authorization, which is important to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this talk. So one listed species that utilizes Bay Point Island is one of my personal favorites. It's a species I've been working on for some time now, and that's the Rufo red knot, which is that russet-breasted shorebird you can see in the center of the image here. It's got that orange tag on it. But this species to me is just endlessly fascinating because it undertakes one of the last great intact migration events that this planet has to offer. Red knots migrate from their wintering grounds in South America to their breeding grounds in the Canadian Arctic on this vast transcontinental migration in the early summer months. And as you can see from these arrows, they stop about halfway through this migration along the shores of the East Coast to refuel. And South Carolina, for its part, is actually among the most important feeding grounds for red knots on this long distance migration. And the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources on Bay Point Island has documented hundreds of red knots, some of which were banded in South America. And, red knots are in South Carolina, and they stop in South Carolina to feed, primarily upon horseshoe crab eggs, and they need to pack on weight really quickly to resume the rest of their northbound journey. And that's why they're very vulnerable. They're vulnerable to human disturbance, to interference, and to development. Another federally threatened shorebird that occupies Bay Point Island is the piping plover. this species is really struggling. It's been lost throughout a lot of its range. It's not in large numbers anymore. Nonetheless, on Bay Point Island, approximately 7 individuals have been documented utilizing that habitat. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but that actually constitutes roughly 6% of South Carolina's entire wintering population. So Bay Point Island is important habitat in that regard. Unfortunately, piping plovers are, just like red knots, vulnerable to human disturbance. We know that when plovers are disturbed, they spend less time foraging, they spend more time alert, and that results in lower body mass. We also know that piping plovers have high site fidelity, which means they're unfortunately much more likely to die by human disturbance than to leave an infected area. So with that said, we know that this project is undeniably going to result in increases in foot traffic, boat traffic, lighting, noise, and all of that together would affect the sheltering and breeding habits and feeding habits of these species. We also know that the project as proposed today would probably result in the complete conversion of some of the key habitat features that they utilize on Bay Point Island. And you can sort of see this in play on this footprint provided by the applicant. And you'll notice on the far right here, the applicant has self-designated an area as an important bird area, in IBA. This area, however, is partly situated within the ocean. It doesn't reflect the actual important bird area designated by the National Audubon Society, nor does it protect most of the key habitat features utilized by red knots and piping plovers. And this IBA designated by the applicant would unfortunately probably be the only area seemingly fully protected from visitor encroachment. When we look at this species conservation outline that was provided by the applicant, it's very generic. It doesn't really articulate any specific mechanisms by which to protect listed shorebirds on Bay Point Island. And it more or less just reads as a suggested list of best practices. And for those reasons, it just, for us, reaffirms the likelihood of take of both red knots and piping plovers. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this at all, but because Amber covered most of it. But again, loggerhead sea turtles utilize Bay Point Island. And one of the primary recovery objectives for this species is ensuring that nesting females have adequate access to nesting beaches. It is suspected that the resort operator will probably install sandbags due to the shifting nature of Bay Point Island, and that could potentially cut off access for females. But, you know, as Amber alluded to, visitors patronizing the beach, increased lighting, the elevated boardwalk envisioned to be placed along the shoreline, all of those things would also impact nesting females as well as newly hatched young, potentially resulting in the take of loggerhead sea turtles. So with that said, and if Bay Point Island isn't rich enough in wildlife, it may also have wood storks and potentially northern long-eared bats utilizing its habitat, both of which are also listed and protected by the Endangered Species Act. So how does this play out in real life? The Zoning Board of Appeals is the relevant permitting entity right now that's faced with the decision as to whether to grant a special use permit. If they do so without conferring with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it does result in the unauthorized take of these species, the Zoning Board of Appeals could be held liable for violations of the Endangered Species Act. But, you know, in closing, I just want to note that Bay Point Island is kind of unique in the sense that there really aren't many places left in the Southeast that have red knots, piping plovers, loggerhead sea turtles, wood storks. And I would argue that the reason they're still there is because of the lack of people. It's because it is relatively undisturbed and unpeopled. The idea that this project could be credibly classified as ecotourism while degrading exceptional shorebird habitat and frankly hastening the decline of these listed species is not really scientifically defensible, and it's almost a perversion of even the most liberal definition of ecotourism. So the project as articulated today, I would argue that we could have that or wildlife that we enjoy on Bay Point Island right now, but not both. In closing, I will hand it back to Juliana since I think I've exceeded my time limit, but thank you guys for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christian, and all of our panelists. And now is the time if you all have any questions to present those to the panelists. I did see one in the chat box thus far, and that is, who owns Bay Point? And I think this is a question that I will be happy to field. The island is co-owned by several owners. You have Philippe Kuehn, who is an investor from Luxembourg, who's owned the island in some capacity for a couple of decades at this point. And then a co-owner is Timothy Pitcher, who is the president of the development firm Luckett and Farley, which is based out of Kentucky. And that is the development firm that would ultimately build the resort. Now, Six Senses, you all have probably heard of Six Senses' role in this. They are the Thai-based resort company that would be operating the resort. So they wouldn't actually own the infrastructure out there. They wouldn't be responsible for building the infrastructure. They would instead lease the infrastructure and operate the daily resort activities out there. So all of the protections that we would hope to see, all of the interactions and conservation efforts would come from Six Senses. So I hope that answers the question about who owns Bay Point. Now, Paula, I believe I see that you have a question. The photo shown looks like there would need to be significant tree removal for this resort to be built. How much area would be impacted? And I can answer that as well. So the ecotourism application that is being pursued by the developers right now only encompasses 50 acres of the island. And the island has roughly 100 to 200 acres of high ground. And then of course, acreage that is beach and marshland. So 50 acres would be impacted for tree removal. And that would have an impact on all of the wildlife that's out there on the island, including some of those species that Christian was talking about. Wood storks will nest in treed areas. Bats may be using dead trees or palmettos for places to sleep. So these will have impacts on these and other species as well. Are there any more questions for our panelists? And I don't know if you all have, if anybody on our attendees list here has been out to St. Philip's Island with Captain Henry and his team, but that is a really great way to see the habitat that is on Bay Point. They're right next door to each other. It's very similar, and and what's happening out there on St. Philip's is a great example of ecotourism here locally. Maureen Smith has a question. As a travel advisor, I know Six Senses quite well. They are environmentally conscious and well known for their stewardship of true eco resorts worldwide. Why are they so interested in Bay Point when it is so clearly not a good choice? That's a great question. I believe there has been a relationship developed between the owners of Bay Point and Six Senses as an operator, and that's why they are interested in it. It may have something to do with the remote nature of Bay Point. We have suggested, as well as a lot of other people, that Daufuskie Island's old resorts that still stand would be a better place to target something like this, because they could restore the habitat out there, the golf courses, reuse the buildings, take advantage of the infrastructure that is already present on that island. So that's a great question, Maureen, and I think it would be great to be raised at the zoning board as to why Bay Point. Susan Jacobson has a question. When does the due diligence period for the developer to get approval expire? I think that you're referencing when the zoning board has to make a decision. And my understanding is that there isn't a current expiration date on that. I can double check for you. But as of right now, the zoning board is slated to see this proposal in just 2 weeks. So we will hopefully know more in 2 weeks, and we'll keep everybody updated on that as well. Let's see, are there any other questions? There's a question about, will there be a bridge or arrive by boat? It will be arriving by boat. There is no bridge. I don't believe you can build a bridge out there. And there has also been discussion of potentially using helicopters, primarily as emergency vehicles, but also potentially as bringing people out to the island. And Susan, the actual contract usually gives the purchaser a particular time. I assume you're talking about the zoning board application. Perhaps you're talking about the Six Senses relationship with the owners, but I do not have an answer to that specific question at this time. Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap everything up. I just want to reiterate my thanks and gratitude for our panelists taking time out of their busy days today to give us some information about the resort out there on Bay Point and what ecotourism looks like, generally speaking, when it's being run well. We will be at that zoning board meeting in just 2 weeks. So if you all are there, please bring masks. Be ready to give comments, and we'll be sending out emails to update everybody on next steps. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate it.